My parents disowned for being gay. Then they tried to demand grandparents' rights over my child. I grew up in a chaotic household, the kind where every single aspect of my life felt scrutinized under a lens I never asked for. I was the oldest of 5 children, and my parents, particularly my mother, had a very clear set of expectations for who I was supposed to be. From the time I was barely old enough to tie my own shoes, she insisted I conform to traditional femininity in every possible way. That meant dresses, makeup, an interest in ladylike hobbies, and eventually a husband from the right sort of family. Anything outside that mold, especially my passion for math and science, was met with suspicion, complaints, or outright demands that I change. Over time, I learned how to keep my head down just enough to survive, yet I always felt the silent storm of tension churning beneath the surface. By the time I reached high school, this tug-of-war escalated to near-constant fighting. My parents' culture allowed for the notion of arranged marriages, which terrified me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon during my junior year, listening to my mother prattle on about a boy she knew from a proper family. She thought he might be perfect for me, if only I stopped being so difficult and agreed to be set up. The mere idea of being pushed into a relationship like that, especially as someone who was already painfully aware of her attraction to other girls, made my skin crawl. For the 1000th time, I tried to explain that I wasn't interested in boys at all, but she refused to listen. She'd just wave a hand in dismissal or accuse me of being confused, convinced her will could override my reality. Despite all the tension at home, I had one beacon of hope: my academic life. When I was buried in textbooks or wrestling with complex calculations, I felt alive and free. That passion ultimately led to multiple scholarship offers. During senior year, I was practically counting down the days until I could go to college, sure that once I escaped my parents' house, I could finally breathe. Yet even with the scholarship opportunities, my mother insisted that my real goal should be to find a husband, a respectable, well-heeled man from a family that met her standards. It was never about my happiness or even my success. It was about preserving her image and meeting cultural expectations. Meanwhile, my father silently sat by, largely agreeing with her, or at least never challenging her viewpoints. Things hit a boiling point when 3 life-changing events happened almost at once. First, I received a phenomenal job offer from a major company in my field, one that not only guaranteed me a position after graduation, but would pay the remainder of my tuition for my last semesters. There was one catch: it required me to move several states away. I couldn't care less about any inconveniences because it was a dream come true for me: full financial independence, a ticket to freedom. I accepted the offer without hesitation. The second revelation was that I came out as gay. Deep down, I'd known for years. My attraction to girls wasn't some phase. It was simply how I felt. Until then, I'd tried to keep quiet, partly out of fear and partly because I couldn't handle one more fight with my mother. But if I was moving away, if I truly had an opportunity to build my life on my terms, it felt hypocritical to keep hiding. So I told them. My parents' reactions seesawed between outright denial: "This is just a rebellious stunt," to moral outrage: "You're bringing shame on our family." They demanded that I recant or see a therapist. I told them no. Their disappointment suffocated the air in the house. Tension was so thick, it felt like walking through glue. The final turning point was my religious conversion. At the time, I was exploring a faith that was dear to a woman I had begun dating, my first serious girlfriend. She and I eventually went our separate ways for reasons unrelated to religion, but meeting her had illuminated a path to a different spiritual community that felt more inclusive and loving than anything I'd known growing up. Converting wasn't a split-second decision. I studied, read widely, and discovered values that resonated more closely with my heart. The religion my parents had raised me in was culturally entwined with their identity. Abandoning it, especially for another, was, in their eyes, a complete betrayal. This, in addition to my sexual orientation, simply confirmed their worst fears. They were livid. Arguments became daily occurrences, each uglier than the last. I can still picture the day I finally left. After another marathon shouting match, my mother screamed that she had had enough of my disobedience, my filthy orientation, and my sinful decision to change faiths. My father didn't bother to defend. He simply said, "If you can't respect our values, you are no daughter of ours." In that moment, I recognized that they were giving me a final ultimatum. If I insisted on forging my own path, moving for the job, living openly as a lesbian, practicing another religion, I was disowned. So I turned to them, quietly thanked them for raising me, and told them I accepted their disown. Then I packed and left without looking back. That was 7 years ago. It was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done, walking away from the only home I'd ever known, even if it was a home full of conflict. Still, a weight lifted the moment I stepped onto the plane with a one-way ticket to a new life. For the next few years, I never once spoke to my parents or my extended relatives. I changed my phone number, blocked them on social media. My only tether to the family was my youngest sister, A. She was the baby of our family, 8 years younger, and someone I'd always cherished. She was still a minor living under my parents' roof, but she secretly reached out once a week or so, mostly late at night, to check in or share how her day went. Over time, we developed an unspoken system of communication. She'd let me know if there was a critical piece of family news, but I'd keep my life private enough that she could never be forced to reveal anything I didn't want known. Our calls and messages were a lifeline for me during those first couple of years when I was lonely and uncertain in a new place. I dove into my new job with zeal. There were endless projects to manage, technologies to master, professional contacts to cultivate. I adored the hustle and the sense of self-worth that came from succeeding in a career I'd dreamed of since my teenage years. Financial independence was new and intoxicating, and though I still struggled with missing the concept of having a family, I built new relationships in my workplace and religious community that filled some of that void. Over time, I met a woman, my future wife, and we connected on a profound level. She was also devout in her faith, which happened to be the same one I'd converted to. Religion was important to both of us, and we felt at peace sharing that spiritual connection. She had been married once before, to a man, and had a young daughter from that relationship. It was a surprise at first. Not many people in my circles had a child from a previous heterosexual marriage, but she'd gone through a lot of self-discovery over the years. By the time we met, she was fully comfortable identifying as a lesbian. I, meanwhile, was learning to navigate dating as an openly gay woman with a complicated family history. Falling in love with her was like finally understanding a language I'd spent my entire life trying to learn. Here was someone who accepted me unconditionally, my ambitions, my faith, my flaws, my story. And her daughter, Maya, quickly became my whole world. Maya was just a toddler when I first met her, and in no time she was following me around the house, giggling as I read her bedtime stories or letting me braid her hair. My parents' condemnation felt more and more distant each time Maya spontaneously wrapped her tiny arms around me, calling me mommy name. Eventually, my girlfriend and I decided to marry. It was a small ceremony by choice, partly because we didn't want drama, and partly because intimate gatherings hold more meaning for both of us. We invited a handful of close friends and my wife's immediate family. My own family was not informed, with the sole exception of my youngest sister, who quietly sent a heartfelt congratulations over the phone. It was bittersweet, imagining how wonderful it might have been under different circumstances to have a supportive mother helping me pick out a wedding dress, or a father walking me down the aisle. But that was a reality I'd never have. I had accepted it. I later legally adopted Maya, although her biological father remained in her life sporadically. He didn't contest the adoption, as it didn't affect his existing parental rights. It simply reflected the reality that I was a full parent figure. Over time, Maya called both my wife and me Mom. My heart swelled with joy each time she referred to me that way. I no longer felt the gaping absence of the family I'd lost. Yes, there were still quiet nights when I missed the idea of parents, but I told myself that the sense of safety and love I'd longed for as a child had finally found a home in my own marriage. Then, in the midst of our bliss, life threw another blessing our way. We used IVF so I could carry a baby. My wife and I wanted a larger family. Siblings for Maya, new memories to build. It took a while, but eventually I got that positive pregnancy test. We cried, we prayed, we celebrated with her family, and I thanked heaven for giving me so much more than I ever imagined. I had a supportive job that had grown into a more senior position. I had a wife who cherished me, a stepdaughter who saw me as an anchor, and a baby on the way. That's when everything imploded. A few weeks ago, my youngest sister, A, was in a horrific car accident caused by a drunk driver. She ended up with multiple fractures, a concussion, and needed extensive physical therapy. Despite our minimal contact and the tension with the rest of my family, I still loved her fiercely. She was a grown woman now, living in her own apartment not too far from our parents' home. But she didn't make much money, and her insurance coverage wasn't the best. Without hesitation, I offered to cover her medical bills. My wife and I were in a comfortable place financially, and A had always been the sole family member who never turned on me. At first, my plan was to quietly wire money to her or speak directly to the hospital about the bills. But because of scheduling complications and the logistical nightmare of dealing with insurance companies, I ended up on the phone with her more frequently. One day, we chatted about her recovery, about physical therapy, about how the fractures might take months to heal. Then she asked if I might consider flying in for a visit to help her adjust to daily living tasks. She mentioned how lonely she felt, cooped up in her apartment, and I was eager to support her. She brought up Maya, asking how old she was now. She was nearly elementary school age, running around full of curiosity and spunk. My sister suggested that maybe Maya would want to see Auntie or come for a short vacation. I considered the logistics, traveling with a small child and also being pregnant. But I was open to the idea of a short trip. We started discussing potential flight schedules, joking about how we could spend afternoons binging some old TV shows while she recovered. That's when our conversation took a life-altering turn. Mid-call, I heard a familiar booming voice in the background. My mother. I froze as adrenaline spiked through me. My mother's voice was unmistakable, and the older I got, the more it triggered an internal alarm. My sister hesitated, but it was too late. My mother had heard something that piqued her interest. Over the phone, I heard her shriek, "Did she just say daughter?" Before my sister could react, my mother snatched the phone. My heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't spoken to her in 7 years, and I never wanted to, but I heard her sputtering, breathing heavily, and then she shrieked, "A daughter? You have a daughter?" My mind raced. Technically, I had a stepdaughter and was pregnant with another child, but my mother wasn't going to care about the details. She screeched question after question, not giving me a chance to respond. "How could you not tell me? Who is this child's father? How dare you keep my grandchild from me?" It was a bizarre moment, hearing her claim my daughter as her grandchild after everything. All those years earlier, she'd said, "You are no daughter of ours." But now that I had a child, she acted as though she'd been waiting all along to become a doting grandmother. My anger simmered. The hypocrisy of it was nearly too much to bear. She raved about how I had stolen the family's chance at building a relationship with their grandchildren, how I had robbed them of their birthright. Eventually, when I couldn't take another second of her ranting, I snapped back in a cold, level voice. "I do have a daughter. You do not have a granddaughter." The line went silent for half a heartbeat. Then she launched into another fury of insults and condemnation. Without waiting for more, I ended the call, blocking her number. My hands shook for minutes afterward as I tried to steady my breathing. My wife walked in, saw my stricken expression, and immediately wrapped me in a hug, whispering that it would be okay. Over the following days, all hell broke loose on social media and my phone. I received messages from my father, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in ages, demanding to know about our precious little granddaughter, or accusing me of being cruel to my parents. It was surreal. The same people who'd ghosted me when I was ostracized suddenly felt entitled to pictures, phone calls, updates. My father wrote a lengthy email demanding that I bring their granddaughter to them so they could fulfill their role as grandparents. He never once apologized for disowning. He never even acknowledged the reasons. Instead, he wrote as if 7 years of silence were a mere blip, and as though I had the obligation to make them happy now that I had a child. My wife, wise and protective, immediately took steps to safeguard Maya. She alerted her school about the possibility that estranged family members might show up unannounced, provided pictures and instructions that nobody but us or a few close relatives could pick her up. We changed our security settings on social media, locked everything down. It was frightening how many stories existed where estranged parents decided to do something drastic, like show up at a school and claim, "I'm the grandparent. I have the right to see my grandchild." We weren't about to take any risks. In the midst of this chaos, my sister, who had always acted as my secret ally, started sending me texts that sounded more like guilt trips than anything else. "Sister, you know mom is just excited. She's still the grandmother, and dad's still the grandfather. Don't you think you could meet them halfway?" Me. "Did you forget how they disowned me? How they told me my orientation and my faith were a disgrace?" Sister, people change. It's been 7 years. Maybe they've mellowed out. They want to see you. They want to see their granddaughter. Me. I'm not going to pretend the last 7 years never happened. But my sister kept pushing. She truly believed that I could find a middle ground with. Maybe that's partly because she hadn't severed ties. She still saw them for holidays, birthdays, dinners. She'd grown used to maintaining a relationship with them, even as she quietly kept in touch with me. She was convinced that if they just saw how happy I was, they'd come around. My gut said it was impossible. People who react with rage and condemnation don't usually turn on a dime, especially not without any sort of genuine apology or willingness to accept accountability. My wife and I talked it over at length. She asked me if I had any curiosity about seeing my parents, giving them a chance to approach me with humility, but every time I imagined it, I felt a flare of panic. Could I bring Maya into a home that called me a sinner? Believed I was living a vile lifestyle? I loved Maya too much to expose her to that kind of emotional danger. That was when I first turned to online forums, places where others had experienced estrangements and family blow-ups. The consensus was overwhelmingly that my parents, having cut me off for so long, had no right to re-enter my life simply because I had a child. That validated what my wife and I already felt. But my sister insisted I was being mean, that I was depriving them of a chance to grow and learn. Meanwhile, the messages from my extended family kept rolling in, some borderline threatening, others dripping with emotional manipulation. "Your father's health isn't what it used to be. Your mother has been so depressed without you. We're so proud of you for making something of yourself. Doesn't your family deserve to share in your joy?" Eventually, after reading so many supportive comments online and discussing it with my wife, I decided to lay out my terms clearly in an email to my sister, knowing she would relay the gist to everyone else anyway. I wrote that I was not opposed to the concept of a reconciliation in theory, but if my parents want a relationship with me or my daughter, they need to apologize and prove they can accept these core facets of my identity. I'm gay. I'm married to a woman. This is non-negotiable. I practice a different faith. Also non-negotiable. I work in my chosen career. No shaming me or telling me to be a housewife. If they can't handle those fundamental truths, then there's no point. Because if they can't accept me, I won't allow them to pretend acceptance only to see my daughter behind my back or undermine my family. In that same message, I told my sister I'd be willing to meet her, and only her, in a nearby city for dinner with absolutely no possibility of my parents dropping by. I needed to see that I could trust her word before I took any step closer to letting my parents into my life. And even then, I told her, my wife and daughter wouldn't attend. That would only come if the initial meeting went well and if I saw genuine willingness to respect my boundaries. What I didn't expect was to receive an email from one of my middle brothers. B. He was a couple of years younger than me and had joined the Navy after high school. Growing up, we were never especially close. He was quiet, respectful, and mostly stayed out of the family conflicts I used to have with my parents. The email from him started with something like, "If you delete this right away, I understand, but I need to say some things." He apologized for not standing up for me all those years ago. He confessed that he joined the military partly to escape my parents' suffocating environment. He admitted that while he never fought them on religion or sexuality, he felt their controlling behavior in other ways, like their demands on what he should study, how he should live. And now that he was in a serious relationship with a woman who wanted him to convert to her faith, he saw exactly how my parents might react. My father and mother had been harsh to me for switching religion. They likely wouldn't be any kinder to him. He worried about what would happen if he and his girlfriend wanted children. He said he felt a pang of guilt for the way I was treated and how silent he'd been. He concluded that he might follow my lead and cut our parents off entirely to shield his future wife and kids from the drama. I cried reading that email, partly in relief, partly in sorrow. I realized I wasn't the only one who had felt smothered, judged, or used. If my brother needed to vent or talk, I wanted him to know he had my support. We arranged to meet in person, and it was the first time I'd seen any sibling besides my youngest sister since leaving home. We met in a neutral spot, a casual restaurant halfway between us. I was nervous walking, but the moment I saw him, I felt an odd sense of recognition and nostalgia. He hugged me tightly and apologized again. He said he'd been following my career from a distance, hearing bits of news from my sister, but never contacting me out of fear or guilt. We spent hours talking, dissecting our childhood. We laughed at some old memories, like building forts out of blankets and cardboard boxes. We also mourned the sense of normalcy we never had. Then, in front of me, he pulled out his phone and sent a group email to the entire family, stating that he was severing ties. He explained that while he loved them, he wouldn't allow the cycle of control and judgment to harm his relationship or any future children he might have. I sat there stunned as I watched him press send, followed by him methodically blocking their numbers on his phone. He looked up at me, exhaled, and said, "I'm done." We both felt an odd wave of release. My sister, in contrast, vacillated. She said she needed time to think about her relationship with our parents. I understood. She was the youngest, and they'd always coddled her differently. Maybe she didn't experience the same level of conflict I did, or maybe she simply wasn't ready to sever ties with. For a while, there was an uneasy quiet. My parents' calls and messages slowed down, possibly because they'd realized I wasn't going to budge easily. But then, out of nowhere, I got a panicked text from my sister. "They're talking about grandparents' rights. They're talking to a lawyer." My first reaction was disbelief. Grandparents' rights? We lived in different states, me in Florida, them in Texas. And these were people who had disowned me for my sexuality and faith, who had never even met Maya in person. Did they truly think they could forcibly wedge themselves into my family? I immediately reached out to some contacts, legal acquaintances, and posted a query on a legal advice. The universal consensus was that they didn't have a leg to stand on. In Florida, for grandparents to have visitation rights, specific criteria typically must be met, often involving the death or incapacitation of one or both parents, or a significant prior relationship between the child and the grandparents. None of that applied here. Additionally, Maya wasn't even my blood daughter. She was my stepdaughter by adoption, and even if she were biologically mine, my parents had no existing relationship with her, had disowned me, and lived out of state. Every lawyer I spoke to or read responses from said it was basically a non-starter. They would burn thousands in legal fees for a case with virtually zero chance of success. Still, it was alarming to hear they were even contemplating such measures. My sister said that once they consulted with a family friend who's a lawyer, they were apparently told the same thing. No judge in their right mind would grant them forced visitation in this scenario. The fact that they tried to pursue that angle at all spoke volumes about their mentality. They believed they were entitled to my child simply because of genetics, ignoring the reality that they'd severed those ties themselves by disowning me. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized how manipulative and controlling their worldview remained. They might have told themselves they'd softened or changed, but in reality, they showed no remorse about the pain they had caused. Instead, they jumped straight to imposing their will, first through emotional manipulation, then through legal threats. I wondered if they truly believed they'd succeed, or if it was purely an intimidation tactic. My wife, unwavering as always, reminded me that they could huff and puff all they wanted. We'd keep everything legally secure. Our daughter's school was on alert, our home security was updated, and any future contact attempts would be documented. We also decided that if I traveled to see my sister, I'd do so alone, leaving Maya safely with my wife. I just couldn't predict how far my parents might go if they discovered my exact location or tried to intercept us. Perhaps I was being overly cautious, but I wanted absolute peace of mind. Over the next few weeks, my sister reported that our parents seemed to be backing off. They were furious, though, especially after my brother's email cutting them out. The last thing I heard from her was that they were ranting about how ungrateful we both were and how someday we'd see the truth. That was enough confirmation for me that nothing much had changed in their attitudes. If they'd been sincere about bridging the gap, maybe they'd have reached out with genuine contrition. Instead, they retreated into indignation. That's essentially where things stand now. My sister remains in a limbo of trying to please everyone. I do hope she'll one day realize she doesn't need to live for our parents' approval. My brother and I are forging a new sibling bond, one built on mutual respect rather than fear. He's still in the Navy but visits me whenever he's on leave. He even met my wife and daughter, and I can't describe the warmth it gave me to watch them laugh and chat, free of the toxicity we grew up. Looking back on it all, I feel a swirl of emotions. Sadness, anger, relief, and above all, gratitude for the life I've built. If you had told me as a teenager I'd walk away from my family, I wouldn't have believed it. But seeing the lengths my parents went to shame me for who I am, their refusal to respect my choices, and then their sudden, entitled pivot once they learned about their granddaughter, I have no regrets about maintaining strict boundaries. My wife, my daughter, and the baby I carry, they deserve an environment of unconditional love and acceptance. I refuse to risk their well-being or emotional health by letting my parents waltz in with their old prejudices. I remember, as a little girl, kneeling by my bed and wishing for a day when my parents would look at me and say, "We're proud of you. We love you no matter what." Over time, I realized that day might never come, but I also realized my self-worth wasn't contingent on their approval. I could love myself, nurture a family built on honesty and kindness, and thrive professionally without ever hearing those words from my parents. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Over the years, I've learned that reconciliation isn't always about letting people back in. Sometimes it's about reconciling who you wanted them to be with who they actually are, and deciding that it's better, for your own peace, to live at a distance. I've made peace with the fact that I'll likely never have a warm maternal figure cheering me on. Instead, I have an incredible wife who stands by me, a daughter who calls me mom, a new baby on the way, and a career that challenges and fulfills me. I have a brother who's emerging from his shell, no longer willing to let our parents dictate how he lives or whom he loves. And I have a sister whom I still care about, even if I can't fully trust her judgments regarding our parents. So, for anyone reading who has faced something similar, know that you aren't alone, and your decision to protect your mental health and the well-being of your chosen family is valid. Blood ties don't grant someone a license to hurt, belittle you, or place demands on your children. If they want to be part of your life, let them prove it through sincere change, consistent respect, and genuine apology. Until then, your energy is better spent on those who truly see and cherish you. As for my parents, the final coda is that they never got the legal visitation they threatened. Unsurprisingly, their family friend attorney told them they had no chance, and that was the end of that bluff. I heard from my sister that they're still outraged, still making dramatic speeches about how I robbed them of their grandchildren. But the truth is, they threw away their right to be grandparents when they turned their backs on. Maybe one day they'll come to grips with that, maybe not. Either way, I'm at peace with the distance, and I'm looking forward to the day my second child is born into a home that knows only love, acceptance, and warmth. And that is the story, how I was a so-called difficult child who refused to bend under parental pressure, eventually found the courage to walk away, built a life that is authentically mine, and navigated the chaos of re-encountering family drama years later. Through it all, the lesson I've learned is simple but hard one. You can't force people to accept you, and you shouldn't let their rejection define your worth. The love I've cultivated in my new family is more than enough to fill the spaces my parents once occupied, and that love keeps growing every single day.